So I just like to structure this as a conversation between us about, the title of the panel is Inspiring Arab Women, Smashing Stereotypes Across the MENA Region and Beyond. I'm very sorry about that. But I just want to kind of preface the conversation with the idea that these women that are joining me today are much more than just a broken stereotype. They're much more than a taboo line that has been crossed. They are inspiring women in their own right, and they have definitely earned the accomplishments and all the accolades that they have received throughout their lives. But I felt that it's important to kind of discuss some of the stereotypes and the reductionist language that surrounds us as Arab women, especially when we're working in and out of the region, that serve to ultimately try to discredit us of our accomplishments. And the only way we can really kind of reduce that reductionist language surrounding us is to have frank and honest conversations like these. So I would just kind of like to start with the question, can you speak to your work and how it makes a case for gender equality within your career organization?
Well, first I would like to thank the organizers of the Harvard conference for inviting me. I mean, the last time I was here was in 2011 on a panel, so I'm happy to be back. I think the concept or this theme of gender equality and women is becoming very global. And I believe that that's a very positive move. If we take a look at, before I talk about my personal experience, just to put it in a more global context, I believe that with, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals having one element on gender equality, with many governments today taking on national plans on trying to include more women, focus on education of women, trying to put women in key positions, I think all of these are positive developments that are definitely going to reflect in a positive way on women's participation going forward. In terms of my personal journey, if you will, when this idea of gender has never really crossed my mind as I was growing up or as I was trying to achieve my goal. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but I think that a key defining feature for women should be working on their competencies. And when you are working on something that you like or have a passion for, your authenticity and your ability to basically break the stereotypes around you become much more natural. So if I'm just, as a start, maybe just to say that I believe in four key elements of success for any individual, and particularly for women from the region, and I can explain that a bit later as the discussion goes ahead. But there are four key competencies, key features for success. First is being competent, being connected, being able to communicate, and then having charm. I think those are the four C's that I always talk about. But that's where I would like to start, and maybe the conversation can take us further.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you again for the invitation. It's really great to be here among a great panelist as well, and inspiring a crowd that I always look up to some of my friends for inspiration too. So truly, I'm not better than anyone here. It's more of we're here to discuss our own experience. To go back to the question of gender equality, I actually never really paid attention to that. I grew up in a family where my parents were very supportive there for education, regardless if you're a female or a male. So it wasn't really a big issue, or I never really paid attention to it until the real world, when I got out there, especially in the interventional cardiology world. So being a doctor, we see a lot of female doctors, and it wasn't really, it didn't really hit me at that point, but getting into the interventional cardiology world, where even in the US, where we consider women going to all different fields, it's only 4.8% of the field are women, actually. And out of the women, the procedures that are being done, only 2.8% are being done by women. So clearly there's a huge gap there. And those women they're not only focusing on how they're being treated differently, but also the salary difference, the way they're getting promoted, a lot of other things that we've never paid attention to going into school or in your early practice years. So I think it's good to pay attention to it. Don't really let it kind of destroy who you are. Make it more of an inspiration to do better. Make it, try to be like a role model for your other female members to help them achieve their goals as well and be an inspiration to others. So.
Yeah, so I grew up the eldest of 8, and my parents also raised us with that same understanding of, as long as you're going after what actually challenges you and what you're really passionate about, that's the main thing. They didn't really cut us slack. We were also homeschooled, so that added a little bit of extra fun since my mom was our principal and teacher. So didn't have any breaks on the weekends. But when it came to college and post-college, I started realizing that, like you in the real world, there are interesting biases and factors that do affect the way that you are either asked to conduct yourself or perceived by others. So for example, I was always someone who would raise their hand and make sure that I stated what was wrong if something was going on or had an idea. And so that earned me the moniker of the B word, which I was extremely proud of being called, considering the fact that that meant that I was apparently assertive. And I still enjoy being called that by folks that feel threatened by it, usually the other gender. But it was really when I started to enter the world of media during my time at Princeton University that I noticed that there was something extremely wrong with the environment that we see stories being shared, with the environment that we see news being created. And so, at that point I had written for publications like the Huffington Post and the Guardian, and I was constantly being asked as a minority and as a woman to speak only on specific topics that the editorial board felt was palatable. So a few of my favorite ones was how to be a hijabi and a feminist, like how does that work, how are you a woman and Muslim, how does that work? Can you tell us again about hijab and feminism? That's every 3 years that cycles through, right? And so that was extremely frustrating because it really boiled down who I was to my gender and to my faith identity and my heritage. And so if you actually look into things, both domestically and globally, within the traditional media newsroom, whether it's traditional or new media, so think New York Times or BuzzFeed, 8 out of 10 of the individuals in that room are men. And when it comes to diversity and the ones that you check off when you're applying to college, whether that's ethnicity or sexuality, then that is about 27%. So 2 to 3 people out of that 10 people in the newsroom are going to be quote unquote diverse. So you have a very specific group of individuals that are making the decisions around the kinds of stories that we're reading. And as a result, women like myself, women like yourselves, and men like yourselves are only getting the kind of content that a very specific group of people thinks is sellable. And on top of that, when it comes to media companies, only 7 to 10% of media companies across the board are owned or run by women. So that really tells you what it actually, and I'll just break down why this matters, right? Because everybody's always talking about fake news and mainstream media, and the media sucks, and I'm in the media, so I'm like, hey. So as a woman in media, what that really means is when it comes to media, and this was my research at Princeton, storytelling and rhetoric, if you think about it, literally affects your memory and your decision making. So by that, I just want to ask you to just take a quick sec and go back to the memory everyone loves to remember, which is what you were doing on the day of 9/11. So if you take a quick second and think about that, that memory is actually not the original memory that you had. And the reason is because so many other people have shared their stories. You've read about the media about other people's stories. Politicians love using this tactic. I'm not going to mention a specific one, but we're all thinking of him. And so what you have going on here is when you have such a small population of individuals, white men, just being completely frank with you, white men deciding what it is that we're reading in the news, what kinds of stories that we're listening to and consuming. Women are left out of that equation. And that was quite literally the reason why me, as 2 years out of college, I was just 2 years out of college, I was like, okay, natural next step, let me move to DC and start a media company, because I was just, if you're letting other people determine the decisions that you're making in life, you know, you think you have autonomy, the reality is you don't really have autonomy if you're a part of the society we're in.
Yeah, right. That's so I know you touched on this a little bit, Laila, but if I could hear from the other panelists, you know, why did you choose the path or the career that you did, and you know, what was some of the most, you know, frustrating obstacles that you faced moving forward?
So I guess for me, it doesn't really have to do with my background as far as why I chose it. It was more of heart disease remains the #1 killer in the US and worldwide, and it's all with all the technology that we have, we still haven't solved a lot of things in medicine, mainly in cardiovascular disease. So that was an inspiration for me to get into the field. Obstacles, I feel like we all face the same obstacles going in, a lot of criticism going in about why you're doing this or that, or the faces that you encounter, they're always underestimating your who you are, or because of your background you're not going to get in, and all these other negative comments, which I always just try to ignore, to be honest. If I can't change their minds, I just ignore them. But there are a lot of challenges that I face still in I guess sometimes with patients here and there, is that I'm not sure if we're going to touch upon that topic later, is that every now and then you have someone looking at you and saying, oh, where are you from? And I tell them I'm from Saudi Arabia, and then they're like, oh, so how are you going to go back and practice? It's always a negative criticism that you get about why are you getting trained when you can't practice, a lot of misunderstanding of the society back there. I think that's always a frustrating thing for me, but I try to take that opportunity to educate them, try to take that opportunity to not only just for them, but also to make me do better, because not only to help them, but also to get out there and reach out to other people, whether it's volunteering or whatever work you can do to reach out to more people.
In my case, since I was 7 years old, I always wanted to be a policymaker, and I was very influenced by, in our home, I come from a family of academicians, so at night we would have all these intellectuals, and I was a little kid, and these people who were having dinner in our home at night, I would go the next day and find them on TV or having a column in the newspaper, or my father doing an interview on the radio. And the one thing that was common among all these people was that all of them had PhDs. So 7 years old, they would ask me, what do you want when you grow up? And I would say, I want a PhD. Do you know what it means? I would say, no, but I want to be able to influence. And at that time, to have a credible voice, you would have to invest in your education. So for all of you here in Harvard, I think you're doing the right thing, of course. And this dream was, I wanted to finish my PhD. I started at the age of 20, finished at the age of 25. I did 2 internships in the meantime. One was at the World Bank and one was at the IMF. And being an intern at the IMF, I think I was the youngest at the time. I was 23 years old or something. And you would see from the engagement with colleagues, with bosses and stuff, oh wow, you can actually influence policy making in the world. And so I said, okay, the one thing that would keep me in the US after my PhD was to join the IMF, which I did. And then in 2005, the Egyptian government asked me to go back and set up monetary policy at the central bank. And I remember my colleagues at the IMF at the time asking me, Rania, are you worried being a woman going back and working in Egypt? And I would say, I mean, come on, you just go to the walls of any monument or any temple in Egypt, and you have all these fantastic examples of Egyptian women. I told them maybe what I'm worried about is seniority. I was 30 years old at the time. I was going to go back and run a very important part of the bureaucracy. And I said, maybe I'm worried about seniority. How would a 30-year-old again be in the middle of more senior men probably manage the situation? And I went there in 2005. I was entrusted to set up a team to talk about a topic that was not very well known at the time: monetary policy, interest rate setting, having a monetary policy committee, etc. And as I mentioned, I think the one thing that you, as a woman, you always have to, and a young woman who's competent, you have to, try and find this balance of trying to convince, reach out. And again, that goes back to, in Harvard has fantastic modules on leadership, and there are two words that you should always keep in mind. You have to be very authentic with what you're doing. You have to, that shows up when you have that passion for what you're saying, when what you have learned in school, what you have practiced operationally, you're able to reach out and give back. And the second very important point is the intention. When you have the right intention to, in my case, it was to serve my country, to make sure that we're implementing state-of-the-art concepts that I've learned and I want to see implement. These two concepts are very, very important. The authenticity and the intention to do what is good has served tremendously. So there are many, I spent 11 years at the central bank. There have been very non-tranquil years. And there's many episodes and anecdotes that I can talk about, but maybe one interesting episode was, this was in 2012, and I had to go to Parliament because they were asking me about, at that time we had IMF negotiations, so I was sitting in the Economic Committee, and this was a room full of, I would say, maybe 20 men, all of them with beards, because at that time there was the Muslim Brotherhood Parliament. And there I was for 3.5 hours. You have to sit there, explain what's going on, and when you know your subject matter, when you're authentic with what you know and you have good intentions, you're actually able to influence. So there are many examples of situations that you are put in, but again, standing your ground, making sure that you're invested in yourself, in your knowledge, and being able to reach out to the other. I think that helps a lot in breaking a lot of the barriers.
Right, absolutely. So you guys have also kind of touched on this a little bit. It's kind of a recurring theme is that, you find yourself surrounded where you are, the only woman, and you feel, like you have to. Do you ever feel like you have to overcompensate necessarily, or that you have to, behave a certain way simply because you feel as if you are the first?
Well, I always like to preface my meetings, either if it's with investors or possible advisors, with just the statement that, my name is Alawa, I run the Tempest, and my goal is global domination. So, and I'm serious about that, Asma can attest to it, but the reason that I state that is because generally in the past, before I said that, I was testing it out, I was experimenting, but before I said that, I was regarded with sort of oh, that's a really adorable project that you're doing, It doesn't matter that you're having great growth and great returns, that's so cute. And it was in large part due to how I looked, the first impression, and what they perceived to be my interests or where I should fit in. And so once I started saying that, actually, the response was a lot more, you get their attention and suddenly they have to reconsider what it is that they've set you in that box. And that's something, I've had to grapple with. Just being completely frank, for example, when you're doing networking events, and I'm usually the only one that's wearing a hijab. And so I started testing out wearing a turban at these events, because sometimes, let me just say, these events are extremely homogenous, and even if they were for women, these networking events, right? So I went to a women's media networking event, and it was extremely homogenous. I'm gonna let you guess what the demographic was, but people were afraid to approach me. And so then the next time I was in that situation, I put on a turban, and suddenly people were confused as to what I was. And I could go up to someone and get in faster. And then once they figured out what I was, it was too late. They were already interested in having a conversation with me. But I haven't had to change the way in which I approach things in terms of the fact that my personality has always been, this is who I am, this is where I'm standing, and you either get on the boat or it's going. But it's really been and I'm sure those of you that are in college can attest to this. Sometimes you just feel so beaten down by microaggressions or things people might have said to you off the cuff, or the way that people might look at you. And so I had to learn who I was before that happened. And that's a constant back and forth, because sometimes it's easier just to keep your head down and just move along with the flow. But if you look at who's in office right now, the amount of qualifications that person has is nil. So why is it that you, as a person, as a woman, as someone who isn't in that conventional space or shouldn't be in this room, why is it that you feel like you don't belong? And so I have to keep reminding myself of that, because it's not just imposter syndrome, which women feel all the time, but if you're a minority, then it's twice as much, right? And so I just keep reminding myself, okay, who's in power right now? What? Obviously, I'm in this room, and I'm going to make sure that people know that I'm in this room, because I deserve to be here just as much as everyone else does. So.
For me, for example, or for women in general, if you are assertive and you are making your point in meetings, then you might be labeled as too aggressive, right? Or that you're arrogant. But if it's a man who's assertive and making his opinion, well, he knows what he's talking about. So I think especially in our societies, it's actually global. It's this comment, you will find that if and you would be basically again reaching out, saying what's right, handling the meeting, giving your opinion. But again, this labeling, too aggressive, or the other word which is always mentioned, and people who are from the region would link with that. Oh, you're a career woman, even though you're basically able to do several things. So I think this labeling sometimes might discourage women from continuing to, because you become mindful. Oh, if I say this, they're going to think that I'm too arrogant. If I say that, they're. So I think, and that's why I believe that this word of just be true to yourself, say what you have to say in meetings, bring your full weight and your full self into whatever it is you're doing, and this paves the way for others. Any woman in a certain position, and by the way, each one of us, or each one of whether you're a student or a professor or a team leader, you have so much influence on how you affect others just by being a role model. So by people observing what you do and seeing that you are maybe successful most of the time, not all of the time, I think that also creates awareness and creates a lot of, emboldens others to move ahead. So I would just say that yes, we are accused many times and not put on equal footing when it comes to perception as men, but that should not discourage women to be bold and move ahead.
Yeah, I think the same thing goes into medicine, and my field is that with a male-dominated field, whenever you have an agenda and a powerful kind of way of changing things, they always look at you as, who are you to make these changes, or you don't have that experience as they do. So I think it's the same experience, but also one thing that I guess at a little bit of a different perspective to this is also socializing for me after hours with the group becomes a bit tricky as a woman and a Muslim woman, where you're working with men and all they do is go to bars or sports events that you're not into. It's kind of hard to fit into that group outside medicine, to be honest. So that's also another challenge, because you have to find other group that you can socialize with outside that group.
Well, how have you gone about making, your own space then within that context?
So the place I'm working at, I'm in a desk next to 7 guys. So sometimes it's a little bit annoying when they throw things on the floor and, and the general mess that they create. But sometimes you have to create your own boundaries. Just say, I'm working right now, don't. But again, going back to the same thing, sometimes they look at you as if you're either aggressive or things like that. But just don't make any of those things play a factor in terms of who you are. Be who you are. And that's it.
Right. I guess the underlying message here is that we all need to, just as women, command respect instead of begging for it, or we just walk in and we own the room, which I think is a really important.
I find that sometimes too with patients and nurses, that when it's a woman, they sort of either mention you by your first name, which I'm fine with if they do with everyone else.
Yeah.
But if it's a male, they would always say a doctor, even if it's a medical student. And if it's a woman, they always look at you as a nurse. Not that there's anything wrong with the nurse, it's just that the mentality that they always feel that the man is always in power.
Right.
That mentality is not gone. It's also here in the U.S.
Right.
They used to think of it more in the Middle East. It's actually everywhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't really probably hurt that much, but it's something to keep in mind that no matter what you achieve, there's still some people who would look at you as an underachiever. So.
Right.
And I'll just bring up one other point. So I'm sure you've all been in meetings where there's 1 or 2 other women and the rest of it is composed of men. One thing that I've noticed both online or in person is, the utopic would be that women support other women. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, because we've been socialized to think that there is a tiny slice of pie and in that pie of opportunity, and that we all have to fight for that tiny slice of pie. But the reality is that we deserve the entire pie. I know I keep saying pie, I'm hungry. And so while it is that we've been told that, hey, you can only fit into that slice, and as such, it causes this sort of animosity, even if it's not conscious at times, especially amongst younger women, to kind of go at each other or not support one another in a way that's constructive. So that's something to really keep in mind, especially when you're on social media and you're seeing other women succeeding. I'm going to quote someone that you all probably have listened to her song. Cardi B was really frustrated by this, and she said, listen, just because I'm successful does not mean that you can't be successful too. You shouldn't be looking at me and say, oh my God, this woman is successful, I'm so jealous of her. You should be looking at Cardi B, for example, and saying, she's so successful, how can I make sure that I'm successful too and be on her, be on that same level? And the second thing I'll note is that if you're in a meeting, because I love it when they do this, but I've had meetings where it's, round table or whatever, and I'll bring up a point. I'm sure you've all had this happen to you if you're a woman. I'll bring up a point, and then nobody seems to listen, and then suddenly the guy next to me says the same exact thing, word for word, and then everyone's like, oh my God, that's amazing, you are a genius, and then they go and they give him credit. So if you're a woman and there's another woman who says something, stand up for her. Make sure that you're not just an ally of her, but you're an advocate of her. Because it doesn't matter what whether you're friends or just colleagues or don't like each other at all, because I know that happens. It's really important to just say, if Esma and I are in a room, and I hate Esma, which I don't, and she says something, that I then echo it and say, Esma said a great idea, you all should pay attention to this. Because we often, in the past, I would just get so angry inside when a man would repeat my idea. And then one day I just snapped and I kept saying, nope, that's my idea, you took it from me. Everyone, like every guy in the room just stared at me like I was insane. There was no other woman in the room, so it didn't really work. But my point is really support women regardless of where you are. And I know Instagram and Facebook can just rip your soul apart because it feels like you are behind everybody else. But I can tell you for a fact that where you are and where they are is likely the same. They're dealing with the same emotions and the same struggles, and it's just so important, especially for young women, and I count myself in that space still, to support one another, you know, even if you don't really know each other, to share what they're doing, because that's really the only way that we're going to be able to make a dent in the gender disparity that's going on.
Kind of jumping off of that, how would you say that you've used your work or within your career field, how have you used that as an opportunity to be an advocate for change?
So I joined a group which is the Women in Innovation under the Society for Interventional Cardiology, and they actually have been really a true inspiration there, from their challenges, from their inspiration, and how do we change things, reaching out to other people in the community. So we've been trying to kind of reach out to people in medical school and say, why are few women going into cardiology and specifically interventional cardiology? So I think one is reaching out, and two, within your field, trying to kind of, although we try not to put gender aside and succeed as who you are, and people look at you as a brain and not the outside looks, and try not to bring it up all the time, because there are things that people are against or with you for the idea itself and not necessarily for the women. Don't play that card every time. If it's true, bring it up. If not, then you should also focus on the big picture here too.
I think the IMF as an institution lately has been focusing very specifically on gender issues and from an economic point of view, meaning that women's participation in the labor force is actually macro-critical. The pie that you were talking about, if more women work the same as men, then the pie grows. So it's not that women would crowd out men and take their jobs, but actually their participation increases the availability of jobs. The other thing that women, by participating in labor force, is the diversification. So some economies might be only industrialized or agriculture. By women coming in, you can find different different sectors growing, which is quite important. So I think from and this is actually, as I mentioned, this global trend is an important one because it affects the national governments and makes them more aware of the importance of educating women and promoting them. On a personal level, I think being a mentor for many of younger women is something that I do and I enjoy very much. And it gives, in addition to helping them, I get a lot of moral help as well, because I meet them later on and I find that, for example, they would remind me of a quote that I gave or something that I said. So I think this reciprocation is extremely important. More women mentoring other women is something which is quite important. And also the mentorship, not just to other women, but also to younger men, so that when they see that you have reached certain positions or have been able to influence, they also look at their colleagues or their sisters or their other women in their space as potentials that could also be good colleagues to them and pull them up. So I think it's a circular sort of relationship, and it's very important to be mindful of how you are as a role model and also give back as a mentor.
So when I was a teenager, I didn't really grow up with friends. It was a little strange. And so as a teenager, I made a vow that if I ever had the power or the ability to do something about it, that would make sure that no woman or girl ever felt left out, silenced, or stereotyped. And so that really left, it really pivoted a lot of the things that I did today with the Tempest, because we're a media company in which we have global reach, and folks that are both men and women read the content. But the content is created by women. And it's created by women that are diverse, that are millennial or Gen Z, women that we specifically recruit because they haven't either written before or been recognized before, but are just really like have interesting thoughts and ideas. And so my main reason in doing that, quite literally, was to make sure that, number one, I'm creating a space in which others feel as though feel and understand how important their narrative and their person is. Because when you're silencing a certain group of individuals by not giving them the chance to be heard, or even giving them the chance to understand that their stories are unique, then you are in essence ensuring that those, like that pie is not something that people might envision as possible for them to enter into. And so by giving we've grown from a platform with maybe 8 writers to over 1,200 writers from more than 20 countries. And some of the women, when we reach out to them, because what we do is we do growth hacking. If you want to ask me what that is later, it's not hacking. But what we do is we reach out to women who may have been tweeting some interesting things or have tried writing before but not been accepted. And we've literally had women cry when they get the email. And I'm not saying that as a facetious, oh my God, yeah, we had women cry when we got the email, but really that someone's actually taking notice and that their voice is interesting and important. And I do that as well as serving as a mentor, but not just, I think you have to serve as a mentor, we also have to serve as an advocate, which I'm sure you do also, where it's more of like a mutual relationship, where if I'm giving you a chance and I'm giving you my time, I want you to push yourself so that in the future we can have this relationship in which we're both on that level and we're both working with one another. So we do that with our fellowships as well, because I grew up with the hadith, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that knowledge is a weapon and it's a source of power, I'm paraphrasing, and that the worst thing is for you to hold it to yourself. So if I've been given this opportunity, the worst thing I can do is to create barriers that prevent women like myself or unlike myself the ability to actually develop out their voices. And these are women who started off with us, have gone on to the New York Times, have gone on to publish books, and really not, and we just gave them that stepping stone and that validation. And I think that's something that we underestimate, And yeah, you can tell me, oh, well, it's a niche publication, only women are, yeah, okay. But then you wouldn't tell that to, I don't know, BuzzFeed that has a lot of men writing for it, or every other media publication that is predominantly male focused. So you can come up to me later if you want to tell me that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we're going to do one more question and then we'll open it up to audience questions. But what do you guys feel what do you feel like we need to do to inspire more women in order to move things forward and accelerate change?
I think a couple of, advice. You guys hear me? I think I'm not.
It's not working.
It's not working. Try to be loud. I don't know if you guys can hear or not.
Yeah, here.
So I guess a few things I would focus on is, one is being proud of your heritage, your background. That's one way that we can change the stereotype of people out there. Some people, like me, probably come out with a hijab, so they know that I'm Muslim, but people who are out there, they should really be proud of who they are and just tell people what their background. And two, whenever you face negative criticism or about your background or who you are, take this opportunity to change their view and just try to talk to them in a nice way of bringing up good things to them about your background, but also make it an inspiration for you to move forward with your career or your goals. And then reaching out to the community, both in the Muslim world and outside, in the Arab world or outside, and just making sure that your words are heard out there as well.
I believe that the focus on women issues. I've attended so many conferences lately, and there's always either a session on women issues, at least a session, if not more. So I think this is creating more understanding, opening a dialogue, highlighting some of the shortcomings or the challenges, giving examples for others to look at. The other thing is that each one of us, if you're a student, you're a role model. If you're a student, you influence how professors are able to see you as an Arab woman or as a woman in general. So I think everyone in what they're doing, just be mindful that you're not just representing yourself, but you're representing a whole group of people, not necessarily who exist now, but ones who are going to come afterwards. So for example, if you're a student, if you're doing well, then when admissions next year or the year after, they're going to say, oh, we had good, a good pool of Arab women who are doing well, so we're going to admit more. If I'm in my job doing well, then it means that when other applicants from the region are applying, then there will be an incentive. So everyone in their own, whatever your specialty is, whatever you're doing, try to do a very good job, because that is going to definitely have a snowball effect on other women. So I think more of what we're doing, showcasing more examples of successful women that provide hope to younger generations. I think all of these are important steps forward.
So my response would actually be three things. So the first one is always be authentic, always be yourself. When you see other people that are successful or people that you want to emulate, understand that they are themselves, and that is part of why they got to where they are now. And so it's really important for you to really reassess and assess who you are and use that to the fullest capability, whether that's your childhood experiences or your heritage or whatever it is. The second one is reach out and ask people that you admire for help. Ask them a question. And I'm saying this as someone who used to be terrified of doing that. But if you think about it, when you go and ask a friend a question, they're going to answer and help you out. And hopefully if I were to ask you a question, we haven't met before or whatever, and via email, I found your email and I asked you a question about cardiology, you would at least hopefully respond to me with some sort of answer, right? And so I always tell people, ask me questions, like I'm here. And it's the same thing with even if you're a student, encourage those that are thinking of applying to your school to ask you questions and be a resource. And the last thing, I'm going to push back a little bit on your statement around representing an entire group of people. And the reason is because when I was 10, 9/11 happened, and I was living in upstate New York. My mom hates this story, and she's sitting in the audience. And so as the eldest of 8, all 8 of us were, or 6 of us at the time, were told from this day forward, you are a representative of the Muslim faith. So everything you do and say will be watched by everyone. And I don't think I really understood it as much at the time, but it did cause me to self-police in ways that I think were detrimental to who I was. I wasn't really loud when I was on public transportation, that sort of thing. And when I wrote my first article for the Huffington Post and it went viral, suddenly I got a flood of messages from folks in the American Muslim community saying, you are, a representative of all of us. That, I was like, oh, great. And I couldn't write for 3 months after that because I kept thinking my personal experiences do not reflect the entire American Muslim community, but I also want to talk about myself, but I'm not, And so it's really understanding that, yes, whatever you do and say will be seen as someone of your heritage. But understand that if you're not authentically yourself, if you are not vulnerable and doing the best that you can in whatever it is, you are stripping yourself of opportunities and in essence also ensuring that you perpetuate the stereotype. But I can just say for me it was crippling when I felt like I had to represent an entire 3 billion people, because I'm not 3 billion people. And it's the same thing when someone asks you to denounce terrorism. It's like, why are you asking me? I'm not 3 billion Muslims, I'm just Laila. go home and watch way too many episodes of The Office. Like I don't, and no, you know, I can't text ISIS and say like, hey, chill. So, so my point is really be yourself, be authentic, be vulnerable, be like a human being, because we all deserve to be on the same playing field. You know, if I'm speaking to an audience of Wellesley students, I would not tell them, hey, you represent all of Wellesley. But since we're with Arabs or with Muslims, then suddenly we feel like you have to represent that entire community. I'm sure Hillary wasn't told you represent the entire Alumni Association of Wellesley College, but you know, I love Hillary. You can come at me for that.